Hey everybody. So today we're going to start with some introductory information for Romeo and Juliet. This is going to be a short video and there will be a small page for you to read and some questions to fill out that I'm going to put up on the classwork tab of Google Classroom. So, you know, let's make certain that we're looking on that we're getting the assignment done and going forward from there. So let's talk first about Romeo and Juliet. Well, William Shakespeare. So, one of the things that I've put up on Classroom for you is the first page of this little workbook that we're kind of going to be working on. And it's background information on William Shakespeare. Now, you can have this kind of playing off to the side and pull this up yourself. Let me see if I can actually zoom this in a little bit. Let's see. So that way we can get some information here. Okay. So, Shakespeare himself. We're over here. William Shakespeare, he's often called the Bard. You'll hear them referred to that sometimes if you're watching something that's talking about Shakespeare, they'll call him the Bard. That always, if you're hearing that, the Bard, it's always referring to Shakespeare. It means poet. He was an English playwright, so from England, poet, and an actor. So not only did he write plays, he was an actor himself. His exact birth date is unknown. We believe that he was born and died on the same day, but it's unknown. What we do have is that the date he was baptized, which is usually done not very long after being born at this time. He was baptized on April 26, 1564. He died on April 23rd, 1616. So we actually believe that he was born and died on the same day because that would be him being baptized 3 days later after he was born. So if he was born on the 23rd, baptized on the 26th. Uh, we don't know for certain, but he was 52 years old when he died. He married Anne Hathaway, not the actress from movies now, but a woman named Anne Hathaway, and they had 3 children. So Shakespeare did most of his writing, what most of the stuff that we know from Shakespeare, which some of the major things, of course, we know Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Macbeth, Othello, a bunch of other ones that I'm going to get into here in a little bit. He did most of that from 1859, or I'm sorry, from 1589 to 1613. So, by the time he was about 25 years old is when he really starts cranking stuff out and writes most of the stuff that we know about up until only 3 years before he died. He's often regarded as the foremost dramatist of his time, drama, of course, being plays, so the most important playwright of his time, foremost. We've talked a little bit about that forward, before, for being up front. So the foremost dramatist of his time. He's at this point in time, he's it. He's the main writer. He wrote 37 plays and 154 sonnets. Now, sonnet is a very specific form of poetry. The Shakespearean sonnet, he has his own style named after him. The Shakespearean sonnet is 14 lines of poetry. It has a very specific set of rhyme. It alternates its rhyme, so every other line rhymes, and then that rhyme changes every 4 lines. And then it wraps up at the very end with what's called a couplet. It's 2 lines that rhyme back to back with each other. And in one of my videos, I'll make another one and talk about some of the Shakespearean sonnets because if we finish this in time, I'd like to get into some stuff with poetry. He lives on through his many plays and poems, which are taught, read, and performed around the world today. You know, his stuff is in every English textbook. Um, there's always going to be something with Shakespeare. I've taken college classes that are nothing but Shakespeare. I have, we've all seen movies that have something to do with Shakespeare. Of course, Romeo and Juliet's had quite a few different movies. Normally in class, there's two of them that I like to show. One made in the 60s and one made in the 90s. The one in the 90s has Leonardo DiCaprio in it. That's the one most people I think are familiar with. But this is stuff that's all over the place. He's made, like, a lot of his stuff is made into movies, TV shows pull all this stuff. So, however, he also lives on with us through the thousands of words he invented and we still use daily. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit. About the play itself, Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy and is Shakespeare's 13th play. Shakespeare primarily wrote three different types of plays. He wrote comedies, tragedies, and histories. Now, tragedy, if you think of the way we know the word, it's sad, bad things happen. And that's the best way to understand the difference in Shakespeare between a comedy and a tragedy. Comedies, granted, we think of a comedy now and it's a funny movie. That might not exactly be how things are at that time, mostly because while a lot of this stuff is funny, there's a lot of really funny stuff that happens in Romeo and Juliet. But it doesn't translate very well because it's written in language, and we're going to get to that later. But it's written in language from 450 years ago. It's almost 500 years ago. So it's hard to understand sometimes. So don't take comedy as meaning, oh, it's hilarious, and tragedy meaning, oh, it's sad. Romeo and Juliet has a very sad ending. Romeo and Juliet is also a very funny play. So they can happen together. The idea is usually if the main characters are alive at the end, it's a comedy. If the main characters are dead at the end, it's a tragedy. That's the best way to look at it. So it was his 13th play. It's set in a city called Verona in Italy, and it's about a feud between two prominent families and the love of two young people from the opposing families, their relationships, and the struggles. So when this play opens up, you have two families, the Montagues and the Capulets. And these two families hate each other. They've hated each other for as long as anybody knows. And they fight in the streets, they'll kill each other on sight. If these two families see each other, they immediately go at it. And the play basically picks up in Act 1, Scene 1 with a fight between these characters. So these families hate each other. Romeo is a Montague. He's the son of the head of the household of the Montagues. Juliet is the daughter of Lord Capulet, the head of the Capulet family. They meet each other, they fall in love, and we'll talk about whether or not this is actually a romantic story as we go along. But they meet each other, they fall in love, and then all heck comes out of it. Everything just goes straight to crap, basically, the moment that these two meet each other. As with many of Shakespeare's works, he did not invent the story of this play. So this isn't something that he sat down and wrote. This is actually a variation of a story that goes all the way back into the 5th century BCE. So by the time that he's retelling this story, this is almost a 2,000-year-old story. He's just putting a modern spin on it. The play was first published in 1597, so almost 450 years ago. So a few other things. This one here, Elizabethan England. The Elizabethan era is so called because it covers the period of Queen Elizabeth I's reign of England and spans from 1558 to 1603. It's often regarded as the golden age in British history, as it was the time when there was a renaissance in culture and national pride. So, England, of course, has kings and queens. They have queen reign. This era and a lot of the eras are usually named after who is currently in power. So, this is Elizabethan, Queen Elizabeth I. It happens during them. It's referred to the Golden Age in British history because this is a time when there's a renaissance. Renaissance means a coming back. So there hadn't been a lot of culture and a lot of pride in being English up until around this period. And as there becomes a lot of art and a lot of major works that are written around this time, we have a lot of upsurge in this culture and in this national pride. So that's an important thing there. Another thing that was mentioned up here, right here, however, he lives on through the thousands of words that he invented. Um, Shakespeare's credited for a lot of words, either him making them up himself or him just being the first time that we have them in recorded history, being in one of his plays or one of his sonnets, one of his poems. So some of the words: champion, rant, amazement, swagger, elbow, obscene, blushing, dwindle, addiction. These are words that first appeared in Shakespeare works. So if you have anybody that run across that talks about having a swagger, or I don't even know if it's something that's in vogue to say anymore, but swag, you know, they have Shakespeare to thank. The Globe Theater, this is very closely entwined with Shakespeare. The Globe Theater was a theater built in London in 1599. It's associated with Shakespeare as it was built by the company of actors of which he was a part. It's an open air theater with 3-story seating in the round, being able to hold up to 3,000 audience members. At the base of the stage, there was an area called the Pit, in which people just paid just a penny to watch a performance. Big thing to remember with when we're talking about. So, this poem or this play was published in 1597. Think about what we do for entertainment right now. We watch movies, we read books, we play video games, we watch television. Now, this stuff existed 450 years ago. Yeah, there were books, but most common people couldn't read. And books were still something that cost a lot of money. So you don't have a lot to do for entertainment. So going to the theater was something that everybody could do. You had rich people and poor people alike there. Something that, very rarely would you have your classes like that come together. But with something like this, that's absolutely what would happen. You would have it's in the round, as it says on the thing here. So seating in the round, which means it's a circle, and you have the stage in the middle. So with this one, you wouldn't have a lot. Weirdly, you wouldn't have a lot of props and things like that. It would mostly be just the actors down on the ground, like on the stage, doing the things, and you wouldn't have a lot of like scenery and stuff like that. But you'd have everybody there, and then at the very near the stage, where they called the pit, that's where all your poor people would sit. It was only a penny so that people could afford to go. A lot of this time they were called groundlings because they were sitting on the ground. They weren't in chairs, they weren't in benches or anything like that. They were literally sitting in the dirt on the ground. And that's where they got to watch. And that's an important thing with a lot of the way that Shakespeare writes. And I mentioned earlier that Shakespeare's a really, like, Romeo and Juliet's a really funny play in a lot of scenes. And that's because you had to appeal to everybody. It couldn't just be all this emotion and all this, great words and all that stuff. It had to be something that even the uneducated, poor people at the time, because these are people who aren't being able to go to school. These are people who, are going to be uneducated. they have to be able to enjoy this as well. So Shakespeare writes to them just as much as he writes to anybody else. And you have some characters there that are just for comic relief. The whole point of this character being in the play is to be funny. And we have a couple characters like that as we get into. The nurse is a character that is a comic relief character. Romeo's best friend Mercutio is a comic relief character. And one of the main points is for them to be funny. And the nurse, especially, she's very, she's very bawdy. She's not vulgar, but she makes a lot of like sexualized jokes. And they're there to make the people laugh. So that's a big thing to remember as we go into how this is written and the way that some of this stuff plays off is it had to be written to make everybody enjoy it. And that's a big part of it. So, what I want y'all to do today. So, what do you hope to do by achieve, or what do you hope to achieve by studying the play? If we were in classroom, this would be a booklet, you'd fill it out, blah, 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 but we're not. I'm going to put this page up on Classroom so that you can look through it. You can actually, have this and use it as your own reference. You don't just have to watch my video to get it. But I'm going to open this. You can do this in a Google Doc and just turn it into it. But before we get into this play, I want you to write down 3 goals for your own learning. I want you to tell me what are 3 goals you have by the end of this play. So we have over here an example. What skills do you want to develop? What knowledge do you want to gain? It could be that you understand, one goal could be that I know I know the story of Romeo and Juliet. We've all heard it. We all hear, oh, it's this wonderful romance. As soon as we get into the play, I'm going to put that down. I do not think this is a romantic play. But as soon as we get into it, we'll talk about that. We'll go through it. And it could be, your thing being, well, this is Romeo and Juliet. It's a very famous work. One of my goals is that I'd like to know more about it. I'd like to be able to talk about it with anybody. That could be a goal. So you tell me what your goals are, 3 of them, for studying this play. And we'll go from there. My next video will get a little bit more into it. I've got some stuff with Shakespeare's language because this stuff was written, 450, 500 years ago. There's stuff in there that isn't going to sound right. If I just read some of the stuff to Romeo and Juliet to you, you're not going to understand a lot of it right off. It takes a while. So we're going to talk somewhere about that. And then we'll talk about some of the characters and we'll get into the play. So as y'all go into the rest of this, I want us to have fun. I'm going to post up another video shortly talking about how we're going to do this. A lot of it's going to be, I post the assignments and y'all turn them back in. Some of it will be that I'm going to do Zoom meetings or Google Meet. I haven't decided which one to use yet. There's kind of a back and forth over whether we should use some of this stuff. I don't know. But I want to do like what are called classroom office hours. I'm going to pick an hour or 2 every, once a week or twice a week, maybe Wednesdays and Fridays, that I'm available. And I'm going to be scheduled to be in a meeting on Classroom or on video, and y'all can join in and talk to me and ask me questions, and we can do things that way. I'm also going to have these videos here. So, let me know if you have any issues with it. Let me know anything that you need to have covered. As always, I'm at kdalton@gilesk12.net. And again, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.